this is the Revolution and Beer Show. I'm W.C. Turk. Next to me, Brian Murray. And next to him is our chef, A.J. Francisco.
Nice to meet you.
How you doing, everybody? If you were with us last week, we started talking about women's issues. We ran out of time. We also talked ginger beer, which we're still enjoying here, and some great food from A.J. A.J., catch us up very quickly on the food that you made for us and how it paired with our beer of the week.
Excellent. Well, the beer of the week it's a wonderful ginger beer, and with that I paired shumai, which are dumplings filled with pork, shrimp, beef, caramelized onion, and roasted garlic. I did that with 2 dipping sauces, a hoisin sweet soy, and a sweet chili sauce. I paired that with a cucumber salad as well as grilled beef skewered, and those are marinated with garlic and ginger as well.
Nicely done, nicely done. Very quickly, I want to introduce our guests again. We have Paula Kamen, author. A couple of wonderful books that I'm very passionate about. The first one was Finding Iris Chang, which you wrote about a friend of yours, a brilliant author, a brilliant historian who wrote The Rape of Nanking, which is, I think, probably one of the most important books written in the 20th century, at least from a history perspective. And also, next to her is Regina Buccola, who's a professor of literature at Roosevelt University. And our friend next to Regina is Linda Bubon from Women and Children First Bookstore here in Andersonville. Welcome, guys. So very quickly, you began, or actually you ended with a story. You were talking about a story about domestic violence. I think that's a really good place for us to begin the second part of the show.
Well, I was saying that it was shocking to me after the bookstore opened and I began reading some of the literature about the abuse of women worldwide. Yeah. Because I grew up in a family with a wonderful, nurturing father who, never laid a hand on my mother. They argued, but it wasn't a violent situation. Mm-hmm. And he came from a family of 10 in which there was no child abuse, there was no hitting. My mother had had an early first marriage with an abusive husband and had gotten out of it. But after I opened the bookstore, I realized how many women's lives had been affected by violence in the home, abuse in the home, seeing their mothers battered, young men, men too, who had been abused by their fathers. And we were talking a little bit in the break about is violence endemic to men? Yeah. Is it just a part of the male psyche and hormonal makeup that we can't do anything about? And I think, well, of course not. We have to, but we have to do more, and we have to stop condoning male violence and a masculine bravado air of I can control everything and everybody's under my thumb. Yeah. That's, it's a swaggering, bolstered, pose that Hollywood supports that we support far too much.
Well, not even toy culture supports. I'm sitting here thinking about, how the nature versus nurture argument. Mm-hmm. I just don't buy that men are inherently more aggressive than women, just period. I just don't think that's true. Mm-hmm. And particularly now as we're getting into all sorts of complexities about gender issues and transgender issues and so forth, and more complex understandings of gendering, I just don't think it's reasonable to say, testosterone equals violent and therefore men are going to be more violent. Yeah. I think a lot of it is culturally supported. Women are from a very early age not authorized to behave in those ways, whereas men are not only authorized, they're actively encouraged in some instances to behave that way.
Even if it was something that was endemic to the male psyche or the male organism, I suppose, there's that whole argument that we hear from time to time about natural law, where things that are happening in society are justified through what animals do, and violence happens in nature.
It's always been that way.
The other side of that is we're supposed to be evolved and evolving beings. We're supposed to be involved in evolving species and cultures, which would sort of exclude that sort of silly notion that we're bound to to our animal selves. And
Well, and we could talk about fundamentalism too.
Yeah,
Fundamentalism
absolutely.
in any religion that condones a subservient position of females and a dominant position of males. And it's true about radical Islam. It's true about Orthodox Judaism, and it's true about fundamentalist Christianity. I think we can leave the Buddhists out of this, but most of the extreme expressions of fundamentalist religion include keeping women down
Yeah.
and not allowing women to have a voice in the family. They walk behind their men. They are forced to have as many babies as the family dictates.
You hear that all the time in this culture. You hear that all the time on right-wing radio, frequently about how few babies are being born to traditional American families. And we all know who they're talking about when they say traditional American families. And then there's also this. There's a cult of motherhood that's grown up in this culture, which doesn't seem about celebrating or even valuing really what motherhood is about and the value of it. It seems to be more of a control mechanism.
My main comment to that and other things that we just talked about is that a lot of times women also, it's not to blame the victim, but they also carry some of the same kinds of attitudes. You know, they might have grown up in an abusive home, and then
Yeah.
that's what feels normal to them.
Yeah.
But when they get older, so there's just a need for just on basic level for men and women to reevaluate a lot of just basic assumptions.
It's always fascinating to me how we get these rigid definitions built in our culture of particular roles, whether they be gender roles, they could be a variety of other things. And they're constantly reinforced until the point of crisis. And then all of a sudden, during the World Wars, World War II, women into the factories, doing the manufacturing, backing the situation up and really taking care of the domestic front. And all of a sudden, it's fine to do that, and there's no problem with it. But yet now, we hear people all the time complaining about the disintegration of the family.
Well, think about working women too, and certainly during World War II, lots of women who had never planned on working went into the workforce. But if you look at all the women in the culture, women of color have always worked. Working class women have always worked. Women have left their children at home, 6 or 8 or 10 of them in the care of a grandma, so they could go and take care of other people's children. So the notion that women didn't join the workplace in big numbers until World War II is somewhat of a myth. Lots of women have always worked and have had to figure out how to care for their children at the same time.
Well, there are lots of cultural myths. Being the owner of a bookstore, as coming through school as a lit student, I was sort of famous for, in every class I would take, raising my hand on the first day of class and saying, where are the women authors, like on our syllabus? Yeah. And frequently in courses, like in 16th and 17th century literature, for example, I was told, well, there aren't any. And it's not that there weren't any. To sort of go to your point, it's they just they fell off the radar screen as the literary canon was created. But so to go back to your comment too, though, about are we evolving, are we not, what is going on here? Is the family disintegrating? I think about something like a show like Modern Family, which really puzzles and perplexes me. So I too come from very comfortable middle-class family, great parents, etc., no abuse in my household, this kind of thing. And my parents turned me onto that show. They love it. But I am puzzled and troubled by it. So it's funny, and I am perplexed by this construction of the modern family. So to me, what is unique about the family, what's supposed to be so edgy and 21st century about these families is that we have 2 gay men who've adopted a daughter, and then we have a Hispanic woman in a prominent role other than housekeeper. And she, in fact, is wealthy because she married well and has her own housekeeper and whatnot. But the two principal women characters, the two moms of a conventional nature, are highly conventional. They don't work. And they're supported by their husbands. And so you have this...
Claire ran for office.
She did, and those were great.
Takes an active role in her community.
But she ran for office under the I mean, everyone's sort of humoring her,
Yeah.
in this run for office. And so I think it's kind of retrograde, weirdly, like this conception that's being culturally presented to us that's wildly popular of modern family. And I'm troubled in similar ways by the popularity of things like Mad Men that seem extremely retrograde.
Yes.
But then that's also sort of critical. I think that the best, in a syllabus for women's studies class, they should have the first season of Mad Men.
Mad Men, yeah.
Young women don't realize just how far the women's movement has taken us since those times.
But then there's some overt things that are really trying to turn the clock back on any advance that women have gained in this society,
Well,
particularly with agency over their own bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's particularly troubling that the issue of birth control, which, has not been outlawed since 1965, made its appearance as a campaign issue in 2012. And, they've just appointed another pope of the Catholic Church who does not believe that people should have access to birth control or abortion. I think it's I don't know how someone who cares so much about the poor cannot care about them being able to control the size of their families. I mean, what impoverishes people more than having more children than they can afford and support?
That's precisely it.
So, it's great that he washes prisoners' feet, but he should care about the poor families that continue to have way more children than they can feed because of his ruling.
You might have less feet to wash at that point.
Exactly.
You gotta
Exactly.
keep the Pope busy.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is fascinating. We were also talking, though, about some victories that women have gained.
Yes.
So I serve on the leadership committee of the Illinois Choice Action Team.
Yep.
And we just yesterday got the New York federal court judge who overruled the ban against pharmacists selling, actually, because it's been over the counter for a while now, but selling Plan B to people that are under 18.
Right.
So now it's going to just be shelved next to condoms and other reproductive resources in every pharmacy, and everyone will be able to access it.
No, but now from that standpoint, I don't know if you've read the ruling at all. It seemed that there was a political angle to that, which really leaves the door open for this to end up back in the courts, where it can be torn apart.
Right. Well, and this goes to Linda's point about this becoming an issue in the 2012 election cycle, where even our Democratic president, who I was so excited in 2008, went to Ms. Magazine and said, "I am a feminist," and famously appeared on the cover with the T-shirt, "I am a feminist." He did not. He sort of let this go by. So Kathleen Sebelius, his appointee, is the one who initially issued these edicts that were then overturned by the court in New York. And so it is definitely a political football. And it's troubling to me that women's bodies are once again a political football.
But he was a regular on The View.
He was.
But then there's also a sort of a positive angle that a reason why this was overturned is that it's a direct result of a lot of grassroots activism and people speaking out and mobilizing. So this never would have gotten done without that. So that's sort of hopeful.
Yes. I'm not really a pessimist. I just play one on TV.
Well, I think about how much has been leveraged at women in society, and you look at the poor communities, low-income communities, decimated economy, of course, lack of access to good food, lack of access to public health services, education. But who is it that usually sticks it out and holds the family together? It's not the men. The men are gone. And it's just fascinating to me that you have this reactionary trend coming back against women's issues when all you have to do is look at disadvantaged communities and see who's really putting it on the line and getting it done. You know what I mean? There are a lot of women out there that are working 3 jobs and raising 3 or 4 kids, and they've got very little support from any male figure whatsoever. These people are heroes to me. I mean, this is just common sense to me.
Well, instead, single mothers are often considered the problem.
Right.
The fact that single women are raising children because, you know, their husband booked it, or maybe he was in one of these horrible wars and has come back disabled or traumatized, or, you know, maybe he was never stepped up to be a dad in the first place. And the media will continue to, and the right wing will continue to blame single mothers for, you know, crime in society and, you know, all these things. And so, yeah,
The whole
I
concept
get
of
really tired of
welfare
that
model.
as a single parent.
Yeah, and those are the only women that they want to work, the single moms. So
Yes.
as every other mom,
Yeah.
it's motherhood is the most important job in the world, so you should be at home. But
Yeah.
then if you're a single mom,
But not if you're poor.
We're not going
You
to
should be
support you
working.
for it. You know what I mean? We're not going to support you for it.
Well,
Right.
and on the subject of positives, I do want to give a shout out to something I follow on Twitter, which is the Good Men Project. And so there's some really good, I mean, the feminist movement needs men too. And there are some really good men out there who are sort of participating in these debates and weighing in on these kinds of issues and supporting, you know, the sort of quote unquote women's side of these kinds of debates and political issues and pieces of legislation and so forth. And so that's really, I mean, I think that's one of the big changes that's happened in this phase of the women's movement, is that there are a lot more men involved in the trenches in the movement than there used to be.
I really wanted to get at least a few minutes about human trafficking and violence against
Yeah, and
women.
we are sitting in Chicago, which is one of the hubs for
Yeah.
trafficking in this country, for both international trafficking and domestic trafficking. It's, you know, we can talk about the integrity of the body for women, but if you're 13 or 14 or 15 and your father is turning you out, or your uncle is turning you out, or you don't have any guy in the home and the pimp in the neighborhood takes an interest in you and cares about you.
16,000 by conservative estimates. 16,000 children in Illinois are involved in sex trade and trafficking.
Really?
Yeah, 100,000 they estimate conservatively, again, because they don't know the number. About 100,000 nationwide annually, and that the rate that and it's predominantly women. I think it's about a 7-to-1 margin, women to men. The average age is 12 to 14.
Oh my goodness.
14 years old.
That
And
is
this
shocking.
is high stakes trafficking, and this is trafficking that not only sexual trafficking, but it's domestic trafficking, it's factories, it's multinational corporations. There's an industry out there to the tune of billions of dollars in this country.
Wow.
A lot of people turning a blind eye to that stuff too, which is terrible.
Yeah, we want to think it happens in third world countries where families, you know, are so poor they have to sell their daughters. But it happens here, it happens all over the city.
Yeah.
And there's way too many. I understand sex workers' demands for legality, but the bottom line is if you're a teenager, if you're a child, you really do not have a choice.
Right.
You really are not able to make a choice
exactly.
about what should happen
And
in your
those
body.
figures, that's 16,000. We're not talking about people who are voluntarily, which seems to me like a very nebulous sort of term in this context. These are people that are forced into this.
Yeah.
So it's a vastly different distinction.
Well, and I believe that even women who choose voluntarily to, say, work in a nightclub and have, you know, do prostitution on the side or whatever, we were talking that like in the Netherlands, where prostitution is legal, it has not cut down on abuse. It hasn't cut down on violence against women. And women don't want to sign up as, I'm a streetwalker, that's my profession, because they want to get out of it.
Yeah.
They don't want, if a woman does choose to do sex work, and I do think there are grown women who should make that choice.
Probably,
Nobody wants to stay in
yeah.
it, you know.
Well, I think
there's
everyone
also-
realizes it's not a viable
It's
long-term
There's-
career track.
That's true, and the 401k is all.
There are a lot of different
Really
kinds
is.
of consensual sex work. I mean, I've known several people that actually organize within the sex work community in Chicago. You know, dominatrix isn't a bad gig, depending on who you are. I have known a few. They have kind of a Robin Hood complex. It's pretty interesting. They get to take it out of rich people, and you know, then they give it back to the poor and protect themselves. It's very interesting. The fact that that's done entirely under the radar, and that
Right.
there's no protection for someone who does that. Yet, are we providing any pathway as a society? Are we working to provide, you know, a pathway to employment and advancement? No. So
There are some individual feminist projects that work with women who are in prostitution. And one of the women who runs a project in New York was recently at the store. And, she was, you know, abused as a child herself. She was put into prostitution when she was 13. And now she works with other young women to get them out and provide them with some other opportunities.
We
So
will
there
actually
are,
have,
but there's nothing, you know, of what we need to really provide
there
those.
needs to be more options than that.
those-
particularly with something that drives those numbers, it's that large of a
Yeah.
problem. We will have on the screen for folks some hotline numbers and some resources where if you know somebody, if you're trapped in something about this, or you just want to know more, if you want to get active and you want to help make a difference, you want to help build that culture that begins to turn this around, that begins to make a difference here. We have the Chicago Coalition Against Sexual Violence. We'll have their number up on the website and on the screen here. The Polaris Project also has a hotline, 888-373-7888. And then La Voz Latina at lavozlatina.rkfd.org. We'll have all of those up on the screen. We'll have them up at the end of the show as well, and we'll have them on our website at revolutionandbeer.com. So please, if you want to make a difference, if you know that this will make a difference in somebody's life, if it makes a difference in your life, these would be some important numbers.
Reach out and get organized.
Exactly. But then, Regina, like you were saying, there is some good news. At least here in Chicago, it seems like Tom Dart, the Cook County Sheriff, wants to make a difference in this. This is on his radar. I don't know how significantly it's on his radar, but it seems like this is something that he does care about, and talk about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this might be an issue that people can organize across the aisle with, you know, like right wing, left wing.
Absolutely.
I have a friend who's conservative, evangelical church of the South Suburbs is organizing against sex trafficking because that's also where it's taking place. So it's something. There's the possibility to build a lot of coalitions.
Absolutely, and we're not shy about building coalitions, especially between, you know, faith and secular groups. That's the way it has to get. We've just got a couple minutes left here, and I wanted to know from you guys, if you do think that we're making progress culturally with men towards issues of violence and sexual trafficking and understanding the scope of the problem. If you think that as a society we understand the scope of the problem.
Yeah. Well, I think you know that's a small percentage of men who are predators. Unfortunately, they're, you know, they do a lot.
They're busy.
They're very busy.
Yeah.
And I think so many men want to protect their women, want to protect their children, want to be a protective presence in the culture, want to help make the world a safer place. It's not that women want men to step in and solve their problems. But yeah, if you can interrupt sexist talk of a colleague.
Yeah.
If you can have a conversation with someone you suspect maybe is being abusive in his home, I mean, you can do that in a way, guy to guy, that we can't.
Last thoughts while we got a couple quick seconds here. Wanted to get both of you
Yeah,
guys.
I mean, I said earlier that I'm not really a pessimist because I'm part of the women's movement, and I feel like to be part of a movement, you have to believe that forward motion is possible, and I do. So, yeah, I mean, I do think that we are on the road. I think there's some very good signs of hope, and absolutely, we're talking about a small percentage of people. And
Yeah.
I mean, I think you look at things like the outrage in the wake of the Steubenville incident, and even Bob Costas, and I mean, his response to the gun violence perpetuated within the football
Precisely.
league.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that these kinds of really public, outspoken responses that are sort
Great
of
point.
universal acts of condemnation really speak to this.
Paul, I'm going to give you the last word.
Yeah, there's been a lot of progress, so much, and a lot of it we just take for granted. Like this latest generation of fathers we were talking about, that we just see that as a reality, that the father's going to help change the diaper and be a caregiver and be involved with the
Mr. Mom.
day-to-day care. And yeah, that's just a basic part of the culture now that we can be grateful for.
I think it's really,
Your husband's with your children today?
Yes, it's not directly impacted my ability to
think it's really
talk about
fast.
feminism.
Thank-
I think that brings us to the end of the show.
yeah.
Yeah. You want to call it?
Yeah, I think it's last call.
All right. Folks, I'd like to thank our great guests, Linda Bubon, Regina Buccola, and Paula Kamen. You were wonderful. Thank you so much for coming. AJ, you rock, dude. Great food as always. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Brian, I'd also like to thank Ben behind the camera, Nick Bacon, and all the folks that join us. Eric, Lindsay, and the Democracy Burlesque folks. Joe Fedorko came on.
Artemis over there.
Exactly.
Valentina, our wonderful bartender.
It was a great conversation. It's always a great conversation, folks. That's what it's all about. It's not about the fight.
It's about solution.
That's it. That's it. On that note, I'd just like to make one last toast, folks. Here's to the holidays.
All 365 of them.
We'll see you next week.
We just want a little revolution. We